I never thought a broken curtain rod could lead to this. The metal groaned in my hands as I steadied it above the window, and she was there, leaning casually against the door frame, arms folded, watching me. There was a grace to her, effortless but not aloof, like she belonged exactly where she was. I couldn't stop noticing the curve of her shoulder, the way her hair caught the late afternoon light, and the faint scent of jasmine that trailed her. "You know," she said softly, almost as if I'd asked her opinion, "you really shouldn't be doing that by yourself." Her voice was calm, confident, but something in the pause afterward made it feel intimate, like a secret shared in a crowded room. I felt my palms tighten around the rod. I had wanted to fix it alone, to prove I could, but the way she stood there, that tiny tilt of her head, made me wonder if maybe she wanted me to struggle just a little. I can manage," I muttered, though I was acutely aware of the closeness. She didn't step back, not even when I brushed past her while reaching for a screw. My arm grazed hers, and I caught a subtle shiver. She didn't flinch, didn't move, but her eyes, dark, steady, lingered on me longer than they needed to. It was the kind of silence that hums between two people who have said too little but felt everything. I adjusted the rod, my fingers brushing hers just as she handed me a screwdriver. Her hand was warm, and the contact lasted a heartbeat too long. I pretended to focus on the tool, but I could feel the pulse in her wrist, the subtle tension in her fingers. It was intoxicating, distracting in a way I wasn't prepared for. "Careful," she whispered, leaning slightly closer than necessary. The warmth of her shoulder brushed mine, and my chest tightened. I caught her scent again, something sweet and familiar like sun-warmed linen, and I wanted to reach out, wanted to close the space that shouldn't exist yet felt inevitable. When the rod clicked into place, she let out a small, satisfied sigh. I looked up at her, catching the light in her eyes, an emotion I couldn't name, something between approval and something more. My hand still lingered near the rod, but I couldn't move. Neither could she. "Now," she said, softer this time, a hint of mischief threading through her calm. "Pull them closed for us." I froze, my chest tightening. She didn't need to explain. The words, the pause, the almost imperceptible tilt of her head. It was an invitation, a challenge, and a confession all at once. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting my fingers graze the fabric, letting the drape fall between us like a quiet caress. Her eyes followed every movement, and I could feel the heat of her gaze crawling up my arm, threading through me. And then, as the curtains finally met in the middle, the quiet intimacy shattered. A sudden knock at the door, sharp, impatient, made us both jump. She glanced at me quickly, a flicker of something unspoken in her eyes, before stepping back, smoothing her blouse, and turning toward the interruption. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just stood there, heart hammering, my hand still tingling from her brush against mine, wondering if the moment had been real or just a taste of something dangerous and impossible. The knock at the door had faded, leaving only the quiet hum of the apartment and the faint rustle of the curtains I'd just closed. I leaned against the wall, trying to calm the sudden heat in my chest. She moved around the room, gathering a few scattered papers, but something about the way she lingered by the window made my eyes follow her, despite every rational thought telling me not to. I remembered the first time I'd come here, months ago, when the apartment had seemed impossibly large and cold. She had invited me in with a smile, but there was always a measured distance, a careful edge, like she had lived long enough to know the weight of closeness. I had my own walls, though different, youthful, untested, easily shaken by her calm confidence. Together, we were a precarious balance, one poised, one hesitant, both drawn toward a line we weren't supposed to cross. She walked past me, and I noticed the faint crease at the corner of her eye, a subtle sign of years lived fully but not without mistakes. I wanted to reach out, brush a stray hair behind her ear, tell her she didn't have to carry all of it alone, but I didn't. Instead, I found myself noticing how the sunlight caught the warm undertone of her skin, how her hand paused over the papers, as if unsure whether to touch or retreat. "You're quiet today?" she said, not looking at me directly. The words were casual, but her tone lingered on mine like a gentle nudge. I shifted slightly, tried to appear nonchalant, but the brush of her fingers against my sleeve as she passed me, accidental, maybe made my pulse spike. She moved too close and then stepped back, and the gap between us felt unbearable and electric all at once. It was risky, yes. The age gap, the social whispers I imagined behind closed doors, the way people might judge if they knew, all of it added layers to something that already felt charged. But more than that, it was the quiet loneliness we both carried. Her smiles sometimes faltered in ways that suggested she hadn't been seen properly in years. And me, I had always admired from the edges, never daring to speak fully, never daring to hope that someone like her could notice someone like me. She turned to me then, eyes holding mine a moment too long, and I could feel the air shift. My hand twitched slightly as I reached for a book she had left on the table. Our fingers brushed lightly, but in that brush there was acknowledgement, electricity, a shared pulse neither of us tried to name. She smiled, a tiny, knowing smile, and I felt something unspoken settle between us. I swallowed, heart racing, but didn't pull away. And when she leaned slightly closer, just enough for her breath to warm the side of my face, the world narrowed to the space between us. Time didn't matter. The knock on the door, the outside world, all of it disappeared. For a fleeting moment, there was only this, only the tension, only the proximity, only the dangerous, beautiful truth that had been waiting to bloom in silence. Then, just like that, she pulled back, but her hand lingered an instant longer than it needed to, and I realized we were both already in too deep. I was stacking books on the shelf when I heard the faint ping of her phone from the kitchen counter. She muttered something under her breath, and the quick, almost imperceptible flinch made me pause mid-motion. For a second, I thought the message was from someone else, someone who could complicate everything between us. But she didn't check it immediately. Her fingers hovered above the screen, indecision in every millisecond. I stepped closer, trying not to look, trying not to breathe too loudly, but my presence seemed to ripple through the room. She glanced at me, a flicker of something unspoken in her eyes. Hesitation, curiosity, something sharper. My hand brushed hers as I reached for a book on the counter, and the electricity of that brief contact made me stiffen, my pulse hammering in my ears. She didn't move away, and I dared to glance at her lips, just for a heartbeat. The thought of leaning in, of closing that gap, hovered in the air, suspended by our mutual restraint. And then, almost instantly, the ping came again. She jumped, startled, her hand jerking toward the phone. "It's nothing," she said, but the way her eyes avoided mine made me doubt it. I wanted to ask who it was, to voice the tension, but the words caught in my throat. Every inch we occupied was electric. Every shared breath weighted with the knowledge of what we weren't supposed to do. She turned to put the phone down, and we were closer than ever. I could feel her warmth pressing gently against my arm, the subtle scent of her perfume drifting into my nose. My fingers itched to brush the strand of hair behind her ear, but I resisted, afraid of crossing a line that might change everything. She leaned slightly toward me, almost as if she wanted me to notice the invitation, and I fought to steady myself, telling myself that patience was everything. The room was suddenly too small. Each glance, each heartbeat, each stolen brush of our fingers was amplified, layered with longing and guilt. I wanted to ask if she felt it too, but fear of her answer, of the judgment from the world outside these walls, made me bite my lip and turn my gaze instead. She followed my look, eyes locking with mine, a slow, fragile acknowledgement passing between us. Time seemed to fragment into short beats. The hum of the fridge, the tap of her shoes on the hardwood, our near-whispered breaths. Every almost touch was a confession, every silence a shared secret. I wanted to reach, to lean closer, but hesitation held me in place. She moved an inch nearer, and our proximity became unbearable. Finally, we paused, standing just millimeters apart. Her hand brushed mine again and lingered. Neither of us pulled away, and in that suspended moment, I realized we had crossed some invisible boundary already, even if no words confirmed it. My chest tightened, my pulse spiking, and I knew we were closer than ever before, trapped together by a tension we both pretended to resist. The apartment had grown impossibly warm. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the floor, and I could feel the quiet pulse of the room pressing against my ribs. She was there, leaning against the counter, a subtle tremor in her fingers that I hadn't noticed before. My hand itched to reach for her, to steady her, to do something, anything, but I stayed rooted, watching her like I'd never truly seen her before. "You're quiet again," she said, voice barely more than a whisper. She turned then, just enough for our shoulders to brush. The contact was slight, but it sent a shiver up my spine. I could feel her breath, warm and light, brushing against my neck. My pulse spiked. Every rational thought fled. I can't stop thinking," I said before I could stop myself, words trembling out, uneven like my heart was trying to speak faster than my brain could manage. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, then softened, and she took a small step closer. Closer. My chest tightened at the closeness, at the unspoken admission we were both aware of but pretending to ignore until now. She reached up, almost casually, and brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear. My fingers twitched at the urge to touch her face, to lean in, to feel her lips so near I could count the rapid beats of her heart. Her gaze dropped briefly, then met mine again, steady and searching, like she was weighing whether to step over a line or retreat. A flash of jealousy, or maybe fear, crossed her expression. "Do you ever regret the people you let in?" she asked softly. I swallowed hard. It wasn't about anyone else. It was about us, about the risk we were taking just by existing in the same space. My voice dropped low, almost a growl. "I've never wanted anyone like this before, not like you." The air between us thickened. She leaned slightly against me, and I felt the press of her body, the subtle warmth, the soft sway of her hair brushing my chest. My hand hovered near her face, near her shoulder, frozen in that delicious tension between control and surrender. Every beat of my heart screamed at me to close the distance, to claim the moment. But something held me back, a lingering fear of ruining everything in a single impulse. She whispered my name, barely audible, and the sound shattered the last of my restraint. I could feel the charge of it, the unspoken truth dangling between us like a thin wire, waiting to snap. Our faces were inches apart. My breath mingled with hers. The world outside had ceased. And then there was the sudden sound of a key in the lock. The moment fractured, suspended, like a wave frozen just before it crashes. I froze. She froze. The space between us still crackled with electricity, her hand still inches from mine, and I realized, whatever happens next, nothing could be undone. The apartment was quiet when the door clicked shut behind her. I was still trying to steady my pulse, the memory of our near touch lingering on my skin like fire. Then she paused, turning sharply toward me, eyes wide with something I couldn't immediately place, fear, guilt, or desire. I overheard something today, she whispered, her voice fragile but sharp, carrying a weight that made my stomach tighten. Someone I didn't expect, they heard about us. My chest thudded hard. I tried to mask it, shifting my weight as if the world itself could be rearranged to give me distance. But there was none. She stepped closer anyway, almost brushing my arm. I could feel her warmth, smell the faint hint of her perfume again, and every instinct in me screamed at me to reach for her, to pull her into the only safety that existed in this world. "Who?" I asked, my voice low, trembling slightly despite my effort to sound calm. She shook her head, biting her lip, and the motion drew my eyes involuntarily to the curve of her jaw, the subtle tension in her neck. "It doesn't matter," she said softly, though her fingers twitched where they rested at her side. "But now, everything feels riskier. I can't pretend it's just us anymore." I swallowed, noticing the faint tremor in my hands. The air between us became heavier, charged in a way that was thrilling and terrifying all at once. I took a cautious step toward her, and she didn't retreat, not immediately. Instead, her breath caught subtly, her chest rising and falling against the hem of her blouse. My pulse raced, and I realized that even in fear, the pull between us hadn't weakened. It had intensified. Riskier, I repeated, barely above a whisper, letting my fingers hover near hers. The brush of my hand along the air toward her wrist was electric, and she shivered just enough that I knew she felt it too. Her eyes locked on mine, searching, questioning, daring. I wanted to speak, to tell her that nothing could undo this, but the words died in my throat. She leaned slightly closer, and I felt the heat of her body against mine, a subtle, magnetic pressure. Every inch of space we closed only heightened the tension. Her voice softened, almost a plea. Do we even try to be careful? I could only shake my head, caught between desire and fear. The risk was intoxicating, dangerous, but it was also the only thing that made sense. My hand brushed the edge of her shoulder, lingering long enough to feel the rapid pulse beneath her skin. She swallowed, eyes fluttering closed for a fraction of a second before meeting mine again. And then, decisively, she stepped back, but not too far. Just enough to create the tension of inches, not feet, a space that was unbearable in its closeness. My fingers twitched, aching to close it, while her breath came faster, her chest rising in subtle, charged anticipation. We can't ignore it, she said, voice low, almost trembling, but steady in its determination. Not anymore. I nodded, and in that instant, the choice became clear. Whatever came next, there was no turning back. The apartment was quiet again, but now it felt different, alive with the soft hum of closeness that had been building for months. We sat side by side on the couch, shoulders brushing, a shared warmth that had once felt impossible, now effortless. She let out a soft sigh, leaning her head gently against mine. My fingers found hers, intertwining naturally, and I felt the tension of months, the fear, the longing, the hesitation, melt away in that simple human contact. You know, she murmured, voice low and steady. I never thought this could work, but here we are. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face, careful, reverent, as though even a casual touch might shatter the fragile perfection of the moment. Neither did I admitted, feeling the truth in my chest. But it feels right with you. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile, eyes glinting with the vulnerability and confidence that had drawn me to her from the start. There was no rush, no frantic desire, just a quiet acknowledgement that whatever had been between us had grown into something worth holding. I leaned in, resting my forehead against hers, feeling the slow rise and fall of her breath. The room seemed to shrink to just the two of us, the outside world fading entirely. We didn't need words. Every glance, every subtle brush of our fingers, every sigh carried the weight of months of unspoken tension and cautious longing. Her hand rested lightly on my arm, as if to anchor us both in this reality we had finally allowed ourselves to claim. I traced small patterns along her hand with my thumb, savoring the feel of her skin beneath mine, the warmth, the reassurance that this, us, was real. There was still the knowledge of what others might say, the age gap, the expectations, the whispers of shoulds and musts. But in this moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was the truth of how we felt, and the quiet certainty that we had navigated the fear and desire to arrive here, together. She tilted her head up slightly, and I kissed her forehead softly, lingering in the gentle intimacy of it. She closed her eyes, resting against me, letting the moment stretch, unbroken, like a pause in the middle of life that held everything that mattered. Finally, she spoke, barely above a whisper. I'm glad we didn't walk away. Neither am I replied, holding her just a little tighter, as though letting go now would undo everything we had fought to understand. The room remained warm, quiet, and filled with the kind of tension that had once terrified us but now felt like home. And for the first time, there was nothing left unspoken, nothing left undone. We stayed like that, Hands intertwined, foreheads pressed together, hearts finally aligned, and in that shared stillness, we knew we had found something rare, real, and impossible to lose.